Hello. So today is Bloodborne. Talked about all the other ones, but Bloodborne is quite a bit different. Not in the stat sort of idea, but in the fact that there are many different weapons that all have their own sort of thing going on, where none of them really relate to each other. As you can see, it's kind of early, so my voice is a bit different. But for the most part, your health is particularly important because blood vials heal for a percentage, which is 40% of your total health. There's also unique blood vials. They will not be mentioned because you can't really get them all that easily, but there are 3 of them that each have their own percentage. I believe one of them is 60. That might be... Okay, there's 4 of them. There's Yosefka's, Adelane's, the other 2... I don't remember. But the other 2, there's one that gives you stamina regeneration. There's one that gives you health regeneration, which is by far the stronger one. The stamina regeneration is from the one who's wearing the red dress, the girl, and the health regeneration is from the one who is part of the church, and I believe Adelane's is from the DLC, but you can only get 3 of those. And she also is locked behind the milkweed rune, or she's locking the milkweed rune behind her, so you're probably not going to get more than 3 of those. But like, if you want the milkweed rune, you can't also get infinite heals from her. And Yosefka's, of course, is not going to be infinite either. You're only going to be able to get 2 of those, but that one, I believe, heals you for a lot more of your health. So those are the healing. This means more health is more heals, and it is recommended to get close to 50 in the stat. It gives you, I believe, exactly the same modifiers as it does in Dark Souls 1. So once you get up to 50 vitality, you have 150 hit points. As can be seen. 1,500 hit points. I said 150, I'm sorry. But then you can also stack on these Carol runes. I believe it was the clockwise metamorphosis, and then you suddenly have a whole lot more health. You can even stack the clockwise metamorphosis runes of 1, 2, and 3, and then you just get progressively more health, and it is quite a lot more health. I do not remember if Bloodborne has that thing where you lose 30% of your health when you invade. But, I think it does? I don't remember. But, so these really help mitigate that if it does. I just... It's been so long, I do not remember. But, endurance matters very little, because dodges cost the least stamina of any Souls game, but it can be nice to see your weapon's entire light chain attack. That is to say, every single weapon has, if you spam your light attacks, it keeps going. It just keeps going, and it does start alternating between a couple of them, but the problem is a lot of them are so heavy, you're probably not going to see them all. Well, a lot of them cost a lot of stamina. They don't have any weight to them. They just... Because they're large weapons, they cost more stamina. It's interesting. But that doesn't matter, because there's no significant combos. I don't think there are very many, but for the most part, you're going to just be getting one hit, and then your opponent's going to be able to shoot into your combo. You're probably going to get parried, and then you're just going to die, so do not spam your light attack. It's completely dependent on, you know, your connection with the other player, which is not always the best, but they can just shoot you and you'll die, so don't do that. Strength limits you from wielding some weapons. Skill also raises the damage of your visceral, which is your critical attack. That is to say, your riposts from parrying someone, which, by the way, a parry is called an interrupt, not a parry, but I'm going to call it a parry because I don't care. Your visceral is your critical attack. That is your parry riposte, and your backstab riposte. So, it has a soft cap of 50, just like your strength does. Your strength, everything has a soft cap of 50, as you can see, except for probably endurance is at 40. You could test that really quickly. With 40, we have 160, just like in Dark Souls 1, and then it does not go up any higher than that. Okay, so yes, everything stops at 50, except for endurance, which stops at 40. But you do not need endurance unless you are going to meta level for some reason, and you don't really have much else to put it in by then, so you might as well put it into endurance. In Bloodborne, I believe I stated this in my quick generalization of it. Not right here. Not right here. It was in my other video. Bloodborne has a very wide range of invasion. This is a good thing, but it prevents you from invading people who are level 30 or less, who have not specifically allowed it to be possible for you to invade them. Well, actually, even then, I don't think it'll work, but you can forcibly summon a bell-ringing maiden by ringing your sinister hunter bell. But I don't think you can be invaded even then, if you're level 30 or less. But if you have a character who's level 43, they can invade down to level 30, which means they can invade everyone, or at least 31. I don't know exactly, but 43 is the level to be at, and it invades all the way up to whatever 98 can invade down to. I don't know what that is. Probably like 50, 60 something, I don't know. Basically, level 43 and level 98 are the only levels to go to. 98 specifically, I believe, goes up to 148, so just to say, that's a lot. That might be wrong though, but those are really the only two invasion levels you can go for in Bloodborne. You could go higher. You can always go higher. I just don't know how it works. There's a calculator. Go check out the calculator. But we're not talking about that extensively right now. I just wanted to mention it. Bloodtinge increases the damage of guns and some weapons, very specifically some weapons, even some weapons only when they're transformed. Scale with Bloodtinge. Also a soft cap of 50. Arcane, the same thing, but also allows you to use hunter tools. There's technically one hunter tool that uses Bloodtinge, but according to the wiki, it still does arcane damage, just to say. And there are some weapons that... Actually, pretty much every single weapon in the entire game has arcane scaling. But that is purely for if they do elemental damage. If they do not do elemental damage, then arcane is not helping. So you can force weapons to have arcane scaling by putting blood gems that add or convert the damage into arcane scaling. Or into arcane damage, elemental damage. It doesn't have to be arcane, because arcane is its own damage type as well. Essentially it's magic, but it's called arcane. There's also lightning and fire. So we're really not changing anything from the general Dark Souls formula. It's still magic, fire, lightning. It's just we also have our blood. Instead of like holy or dark, we have blood. So instead of infusions, we have blood gems. Blood gems can come in all sorts of shapes and abilities. Each main hand weapon can have 3 blood gems, with limitations on shapes, but droplet gems fit into anything. So you can always put in a droplet gem into whatever, and it'll just work. The one you get from the sort of quest line with the doll that gives you healing. You can put that one into anything. Usually I put it into my gun, because I don't really care how much damage the gun is doing, because the gun will just lead into a parry. But if you're on a Bloodtinge build, then you do care how much damage your gun is doing, so you don't really want to do that. You'd probably put it into an offhand weapon that you're not using, or an offhand gun that you're not using, specifically so that, you know, you can just heal. Because healing is very nice, regeneration, you know? But cursed gems have stronger effects, but they also come with a downside. I would say the most recommended one is maybe your attack versus the kin or attack versus beasts, because that doesn't come up into PvP. But if you really wanted a no downsides sort of thing, you could also use the I think it was stamina consumption up, because you know, stamina is not really such a big deal. It can be, especially if you have 3 of those, but I would say it's the least of the downsides. If you really didn't want to have the attack versus kin or beasts. This will force you to farm them in chalice dungeons. That is because they are extremely powerful. They give you percentage damage boosts up to, I believe, 32.7, maybe 33, I don't remember. But it's a lot. Gives you a lot of damage. And then there's like abyssal cold ones, and there's blunt damage up, which I believe goes even higher if you specifically know your weapon is blunt damage. And then there's the gun ones, I believe those are radials. They may not be. They might be circular. There's like radial and circular. And one of them is for blood gem, for guns, and one of them is for any weapon. And for a weapon to have like a blood gem like that, like a gem specifically for blood damage, that's pretty rare. But I know that there's a Chikage that has that. But next up are notes. Visceral attacks have increased damage based on your skill stat. Equipped weapons gems that affect scaling or thrust damage, because apparently visceral attacks count as thrust damage. Carol runes, such as the claw mark runes, specifically. And bonus effects like serrated-righteous weapon effects. So, if whatever you're hitting is weak to serrated or righteous weapons, then if your weapon that you are wielding currently has serrated or righteous effects, and you got a visceral attack, you will do 20% bonus damage to that opponent. Or 40 if you have both, and it's weak to both. You can really hurt people with visceral attacks, that's the point. It's just crazy, it scales with skill. Because then it's like, okay, I'll just make a skill build. And then you're like, wait, Bloodtinge, the thing I'm using to initiate my riposte, also does a lot of damage. So then it's just like, okay, I'm just gonna one-shot everyone, and it's just gonna be how it is. No, you still need to land the parry, but then it's like, okay, then I'll never swing, and I'll only use my gun. So, Beasthood boosts damage and lowers defenses while active. You can only activate Beasthood during the effects of the Beast's Embrace rune. You can also use the transformed Beast Claws. I believe the Beast's Embrace rune, you specifically have to also have the claws, but I might be wrong about that. I'm pretty sure you do. I'm pretty sure it's just the Beast Claws. The thing is, if you have the Beast's Embrace rune, you don't have to use the transformed Beast Claws, and we'll get more into that later. And the Beast's Blood pellets will also activate your Beasthood. It's like, you eat a Beast Blood pellet, you can automatically have Beasthood. And I think it does stack with the effect of the Beast Claws, so you can do both. Then there's the Rally mechanic, which allows you to restore health. You recently lost, you can still see it, it's sort of like yellow, maybe orange, in your health bar. You can attack enemies within a short duration, and each weapon has a different restoration value. And I believe the highest is 75 on the Hunter's Axe, which is interesting. Makes it a really good first weapon choice. And in general. All weapons have extensive movesets, including backstep. Weapons have backstep and running, heavy, or light attacks. You can do a backstep or a running attack, and they have heavy and light versions of both of those. They also have different attacks for if you dodge to the left, or if you dodge to the right while locked on to something. It's very interesting. Very intricate. Also, everything has jump attacks, well, jump attacks were before Elden Ring. Just a forward and heavy input, and you do jump off the ground, but you don't get very far. It's just interesting. It's just interesting to note that jump attacks did exist. Not in Demon Souls, but there are also lost and uncanny versions of every main hand weapon that have different gem slots and can be found in Chalice dungeons. Not always the best one for what you're going for. Sometimes it's better to have radial gems, but the lost and uncanny versions sometimes, like for the Chikage, will have a specific gem slot that it's like, oh, this is a really good idea on this build because triangular gems are more often better at elemental damage. So maybe you would want a version that has elemental stuff to it. The arcane scaling on weapons without elemental damage does not do anything until they have elemental damage because of blood gems, transformation, or maybe buffs. So yeah, that's the general idea. Every weapon is different. So We're going to cover every single weapon. Every single one of them. Because every weapon is different, and if I didn't do this, it would be a much shorter video. So, the Hunter's Axe is mainly a strength weapon. The lower requirements make it easy to convert into an elemental weapon, that is to say an arcane weapon. I believe I stopped saying elemental immediately after this, so don't worry about that. A stronger wide swings in the transform state cannot use the offhand while transformed. So when you transform the Hunter's Axe, it's a two-handed weapon, and I'm going to start saying that pretty soon in these notes. Notable notes. It mainly does blunt damage, which is weird because you'd think it would be an axe, but it's not. It does blunt damage. It can be buffed. It has high rally, possibly the highest. It's 75 rally, it says on the wiki. I also recommend checking out the wiki. I will go ahead and put it into the description, although I haven't done that for any of the other ones. Specifically because, as I was reading it, it goes into such good detail for everything, so. I also have it in the shorter version of the Bloodborne description thing, so check that out too. Also has the calculator over here. Harder to get backstabs in transform mode because the charge transform attack hits twice, so these are going to be pretty short for the most part. I stopped going into such significant detail, so as we go on, it's going to get a bit shorter. The saw cleaver, very popular. Leans slightly towards strength and arcane, but it has very low requirements, making it easy to convert to arcane. The entire moveset is one-handed, and the only reason to transform the weapon is for the longer range, the cost of everything else. It really doesn't have that great moveset in the transform state. It's much slower, it just has a little bit more range. Typically you don't really benefit from more range because you have running attacks, but you never know. Especially because having longer running attacks is definitely a good thing, so there are benefits to the transform, it's really just for the longer range. This weapon is serrated in its untransformed state. It does not have the serrated bonus when it is transformed. It can be buffed. It has really low rally. I believe it had 30. So low rally in this context is going to be 30 or a bit less than that. Maybe I think 35, but I didn't really see too many 35s, so. Medium is going to be 40 up to 50, and then high is going to be, well, okay, not 40 to 50, it's going to be like 40. Medium is going to be 40, and then high is going to be 50, 45 higher. I don't know. It's going to be a general amount, because it's really just, there's 125, and then there's 175, so there wasn't a whole lot to work with. So you don't got to worry about it too much. The saw spear leans more into skill and arcane. Now, the saw spear, I say, is a straight upgrade to the saw cleaver. In its untransformed state, it's exactly like the saw cleaver. And in its transformed state, it's just better because it has longer range and some thrust attacks, and it still counts as serrated in both forms. I still don't think it's a great idea to transform it, but because it has a running thrust attack, that makes it a bit easier to use as a ranged sort of weapon, but because of the idea that the cleaver has a wider range to its running heavy attack, it could be that the saw spear is not as great, but thrust counter hits are nothing to laugh at. So it has low requirements, so you can easily turn it into an arcane weapon. Counts as serrated, it can be buffed, it has low rally, about the same amount. I believe it's also at 30. They might be at 35, I'm not sure. Next up is the threaded cane. Threaded cane is majorly skill scaling with good arcane scaling. It has low requirements, making it easy to turn into an arcane weapon. The entire moveset is one-handed, but it's much longer when it's transformed, and it does sort of whip attacks. It's kind of cool. Counts as righteous in the normal mode. It's serrated when it's transformed. It can be buffed. It has low rally, I believe, also at 30. Its transform mode cannot perform backstabs because it does not have a charged heavy attack. And apparently, the threaded cane also gives you a skill scaling bonus. So, while this is equipped, and I guess I forgot to write this down, or I didn't see it in the notes, or I'm pretty sure I just forgot to write it down because I did see it in the notes. But anyway, threaded cane gives you a small skill scaling bonus. I believe just by having it equipped, all of your other stuff gets a very tiny skill scaling. I'm sorry, I'm still waking up. The threaded cane has very small skill scaling bonus, so it'll increase how much skill it scales with. It's just something to note. The Kirkhammer, the first interesting weapon we have on here. It has majorly strength scaling with good arcane scaling, somewhat higher requirements, but still capable as an arcane weapon. Moves as a straight sword normally and attaches to a large hammer when transformed, so somewhat higher. It's only 16 strength requirement. We can put it in over here really. So it requires 16 strength, which is why it has somewhat higher requirements, because normally you don't really need like more than 12 in a stat in order to use stuff. You'll find that the requirements for Bloodborne's weapons are usually not very high, and they don't have any weight to them, so you can really just do whatever. You can put everything to 20 and then be like, okay, I'm good, I can use everything now. The Kirkhammer can be buffed. It has unique transforming attacks. It can be performed immediately after a transform input with a light input, so you can do a light attack while your weapon is transforming in order to follow up with a unique transforming attack. It's different. And the Kirkhammer is one of the more strange weapons because it can enter a blocking state by holding L2, which is the left heavy button, normally the parry button, or the block button in Bloodborne's case. And while you're being hit during a running or backstep light attack while the weapon is transformed, you can enter into a blocking state as long as you hold the left heavy button. It's very interesting. There's only 2 weapons that do this. One of them is the Kirkhammer. And it has very high rally at 60, I believe it was. Next we have the Rifle Spear. The Rifle Spear has mainly skill scaling with good Bloodtinge scaling. It has low requirements, allowing it to become an arcane weapon easily. If we put it in over here, I believe it will tell us. So yes, see, nothing goes above 12, so it's very low. Its transform mode prevents use of the offhand, but it can be used as a gun for parries, which is interesting. It fires a shotgun spread when it's transformed. It used to have this glitch where if you added arcane add gems that would add damage, it would increase the damage of every pellet by an incredible amount, and you could just destroy people with it. But because of this, the Rifle Spear cannot be buffed, because if you could, it would do an absurd amount of damage. Bullets only scale with Bloodtinge, nothing else, especially not anymore. It has a medium rally, which is probably 40 rally then. Rifle Spear is an interesting weapon. It's not amazing. The notes said that on the wiki that the transformed heavy charge attack goes a lot farther, and it definitely does. I tested it out, but it also takes a while to actually activate. But you could knock people over with it. It'd be cool. The Stake Driver, one of the more popular weapons because of its explosive transformed heavy attack. It has slightly more strength scaling with comparable skill scaling. It's a quality weapon, but higher arcane scaling, which is interesting. It actually has its arcane scaling as its highest amount, considering that this thing has a strength requirement of 18. The higher strength requirement makes it somewhat difficult to turn into an arcane weapon, but it's apparently appealing because it has higher arcane scaling than everything else. The entire moveset is one-handed. The transformed mode has less range. It also has faster like jabs, but I would say it's better untransformed, which is weird. You really only want to transform it so you can use the heavy charge attack. The Stake Driver can be buffed. Its rally is low, I believe at 30. Its transformed charged heavy attack is the strongest attack in the game and returns the weapon to normal mode whenever you use it. So if you do a heavy attack with this weapon, even if it's not charged, I believe it will still transform back into its one-handed moveset, or its normal moveset. The whole thing is one-handed. It will untransform it. But yeah, The stake driver is really fun. I would say I like it as a weapon. It's very difficult to land the charged heavy attack against anything that can move, which includes most players, but if you can do it, it's very effective, especially since it causes a small area of effect with the explosion that it causes. So you could technically hit behind someone if they bump into you. It's an option. I've seen it done before. Pretty cool. Ludwig's Holy Blade. It has slightly higher strength scaling with comparable skill scaling, which means it's a quality weapon. It has higher arcane scaling, which means it's really good for arcane weapons. It has somewhat higher requirements, which makes it difficult to be an arcane weapon. I believe it works much like the Kirkhammer and might have exactly the same amount. It does at 12 strength, 12 skill, and 16 strength. It's normally a straight sword. It transforms into a great sword that mainly does blunt damage, and you cannot use the offhand while transformed. And I'm going to stop saying that very quickly as soon as I start saying it's two-handed. It can be buffed, as long as you don't have elemental damage on it. It has high rally, which is 60. It has unique light attacks during transform inputs, much like the Kirkhammer does. And exactly like the Kirkhammer does, it can enter a blocking state when attacked during backstep transform light attacks by holding the left heavy button, or the L2. Because this is just a PlayStation game, for quite the while. It's the L2 button if you're using a PlayStation controller, and I don't think you can use anything else, so L2 is the correct way to say it. So Ludwig's Holy Blade, however, unlike the Kirkhammer, can only enter this blocking state during backstep transformed light attacks. So the weapon has to be transformed, you have to be doing a backstep light attack, and then you have to hold, you have to get hit. You have to get hit, and you have to be holding the left heavy button. So it's a bit more difficult to do because you can't do it off of a running light attack, but it's still something to remember. It's not great, but the fact remains you can use it to block bullets at best, I guess. Use it to block bullets. The Blade of Mercy. Majorly skill scaling with decent arcane scaling. Its low requirements make it easy to become an arcane weapon, but it majorly prefers skill scaling. Blade of Mercy. It has low requirements, apparently. Yeah, you only need 7 strength, 11 skill. Wow. It's stronger in normal mode, and faster in the transform mode. You cannot use offhand weapons while transformed, because it's two-handed while it's transformed. So it cannot be buffed. It has low rally, and the transformed mode cannot perform backstabs because it does not have a charged heavy attack, much like the threaded cane. It's a pretty basic weapon, but it's very fun because you can just sort of start attacking people. If you get them into a corner, they can't really mash into you just spamming the attack button on them. It's technically better when it's untransformed, if you're doing a sort of hit and run playstyle, but the transform state is still very effective for what it does. The Tonitrus is probably the least interesting weapon, say, because it doesn't really have a transform state, and it only has a light attack chain that it has 3 different swings to it, but it has higher strength scaling. The low requirements make it somewhat easy to turn into an arcane weapon, but it has low arcane scaling. So you could turn it into a pure lightning weapon. That would probably be pretty good, but the problem is it has very low arcane scaling, so it still wouldn't be amazing as that. The entire moveset is one-handed. Instead of transforming, it applies a lightning buff, but there is still a transform attack. So you can still do the transform attack to buff the weapon, but the problem is the buff runs out very quickly. The whole thing has pretty low durability, I believe. Well, relatively low. It's still decent enough, but it can be a good idea to have more than one. Because of that, it can only buff itself. It cannot be buffed by other things. It has medium rally, which is to say it has like 40, 45. The Tonitrus is just a very basic weapon that does what it does, and it does it pretty well. The Chikage is a very powerful weapon. It has majorly Bloodtinge scaling with good skill scaling. It's difficult to turn into an arcane weapon because it is majorly a Bloodtinge weapon and has a low arcane scaling. Transformed mode is two-handed and you cannot use an offhand weapon while it's transformed. It also lowers health while it's transformed, so the entire time this weapon's transformed, you lose 1% of your health. It cannot be buffed. It has a medium rally at like 40-45, I don't know. Normal mode only scales with strength and skill, and transformed mode only scales with Bloodtinge. So, if you want to use strength and skill, you have to use it in its normal state, that is the one-handed state. And the transform mode only scales with Bloodtinge. It does not get any benefit from strength or skill at all. I don't know how it works if you start putting elemental damage in there. Most of the time, it makes it so that it just straight up doesn't work anymore. So just think about it. I don't know. You probably aren't going to make an Arcane Chikage build, but if you do, I don't know exactly how that's gonna work. Normally, when something transforms and only scales with one thing, it stays that way, so it becomes less useful to actually keep it. To actually use the transform state in that situation. So, transformed heavy attacks significantly drain health by charging. Performing a light attack while entering transform mode causes a powerful unsheath attack. So that means if you, instead of doing a transform attack, you just do the normal transform, you have access to this light attack, which will cause a powerful unsheath sort of attack. It's very common, a lot of people know how to do it. It does a lot of damage if it actually hits. And one more thing to think about is that the transform mode also inflicts rapid poisoning, which is essentially bleed, because it does an immediate effect as soon as it's activated that does a lot of damage. It doesn't have very good build-up. I think it said it had 30. But you can add to that and it'll be very powerful. You just need to get the right gems for it. But I would say it's better to just go heavily into Bloodtinge and start actually hitting people. That's just me, you never know. The Reiterpallasch, a majorly skill scaling with good arcane scaling. Its low requirements make it easy to become an arcane weapon, but the small Bloodtinge requirement makes it less simple to do so. Let's see how much it has. It's only 10 requirement, but on an arcane build you might not have that. The skill requirement might be a bit higher as well, but you never know. It's an interesting weapon. Its entire moveset is one-handed. It can be particularly effective at shooting because of the 3 gem slots despite the low Bloodtinge scaling. So it doesn't have really good Bloodtinge scaling, but because you have 3 gem slots, and usually physical damage also increases Bloodtinge damage, so you don't have to think too hard about it. You can just put in 3 gem slots, it'll boost the bullet damage as well. And because of this, it makes it a very good gun as well, because guns don't normally get to have 3 gems, they only get to have 1. So because of that, it still is comparable to the Evelyn and other such weapons. It's surprisingly able to be buffed, and yes, the buff does apply to bullets that are fired from the weapon, so it's a good thing that it only fires 1, and that's probably why they allowed that to still be a thing, because it only fires 1 bullet. But yes, you can buff it. It has medium rally, which is to say 40, maybe 45, probably it's just 40. The transformed mode cannot perform backstabs because it does not have a charged heavy attack. Instead, it has the ability to shoot people, so you can still do parries. And it's very common, it's a very interesting idea that people like to do, to use the Reiterpallasch alongside a cannon, which has been buffed even further using Bone Ash Marrow. So they parry people with the Reiterpallasch's ability to shoot things, and then they shoot them with the cannon, and then the opponent just dies because of the counter hit damage and the massive cannon blast. So yes, you can do that. It's very fun. Logarius' Wheel. It's a majorly strength scaling with good arcane scaling weapon. It is already an arcane weapon, especially when transformed, so you don't need to worry about turning it into one. It's already one. You still can. You can put fire on it or something, but I don't recommend it, I don't think. Normal mode is one-handed and transformed is two-handed. Transformed adds significant arcane damage and scaling, but it lowers physical damage by 30%. So if you wanted to make this more of an arcane weapon, that's probably a good idea. It's, I don't know. When it's one-handed in its normal mode, it's still a pretty good weapon. It does, like, more physical damage. I don't know. If you wanted to make it into not so much of a physical weapon, you definitely have to transform it. That's pretty much it. It cannot be buffed. It's very low rally. It has low rally, which is to say it has 30. The whole moveset has righteous damage. So anything that takes bonus damage from righteous, this would be it. This would be a good weapon for that. The transformed L2, which is the left heavy, increases arcane damage by values of 10%, 20%, 40%, and then 60%. It does not go higher than that. Every time you push the button, it boosts how much it scales, as long as the weapon stays in the transform state. If you want to undo it, you have to untransform the weapon. But this also causes your health to decrease by 1%, 2%, 3%, and then 4% per second. So you very quickly start dying every time you activate one of these buffs. It increases the percentage that you die at. The transform mode cannot perform backstabs because it does not have a charged heavy attack. I also believe that the transformed boost, it actually wears off over time, but I'm not sure about that. I'd have to check it again. The transform mode cannot perform backstabs. It does not have a charged heavy attack. Instead, it has a heavy attack that I believe it hits multiple times. It's kind of slow, but it's an interesting idea. If you wanted to hit something like a whole lot, like a larger target. A lot of these were built with the idea that you'd be hitting them against basic enemies and not other players. So. The Burial Blade is mainly skill scaling with good arcane scaling. It already has arcane on it. Low requirements and good arcane scaling make it useful as an arcane weapon. Normal mode is one-handed, while transformed is two-handed. The transformed state is more of the saif, and the other one is a curved sword sort of idea. It cannot be buffed. It has very high rally. It's 60, probably, maybe 50. 60-50, I don't know. The Burial Blade is just a very basic weapon otherwise. It doesn't really have anything notable about it. It's not serrated, it's not righteous. It just is a pretty good weapon. It does, however, have some of the higher, like, damage modifiers, I believe, when it's transformed, but yeah, it's just a pretty cool weapon. The automatic arcane stuff makes it pretty good for arcane stuff. Beast Claw, one of the more unique weapons. It has slightly higher strength scaling, but somewhat low scaling overall, which is surprising, but it's mainly because of its other effect, where it allows you to use Beasthood, but requires some strength and skill to use, and has low arcane scaling, but can still be a decent arcane weapon. So let's check. I think I already have this. I did not. I switched it out. That's right. Okay. So it has a little bit of a requirement to it. It can be buffed, which is interesting, because it's like your fist weapons. You have these claws that are all glowy now. When it's in its normal mode, it's one-handed, and when it's transformed, it's two-handed. You have two claws now. You do not swing them both at the same time. You alternate with them for the most part. The transformed mode allows for Beasthood to affect attacks. So while this weapon is transformed, you can build up your Beasthood meter, and as your Beasthood meter increases, it gives you more and more damage. I describe it further down here somewhere. So it has very low rally, possibly the lowest, at a mere 25 rally. It's not ridiculously low, it's only 5 less than 30, which is the popular amount for stuff to have, but the Beast Claw definitely has very low rally. Remember that Insight lowers your Beasthood potential, and what Beasthood does is it raises your damage while lowering your defenses. So the higher your Beasthood is at, the less defense you're going to have, and the more damage you're going to do. So if you do get hit, you're going to take a lot of damage. And remember, it has very low rally. So you definitely do not want to get hit, but you do want to be hitting things a whole lot. The moveset changes when used with the Beast's Embrace rune. It cannot perform backstabs when it's in its transformed mode because it does not have a charged heavy attack. Its Beasthood is active with normal mode and transform mode. And the Beast's Embrace rune moveset is kind of the better version of this. If you can afford to use the Beasthood, the Beast's Embrace rune, it would definitely be a good idea to use with your Beast Claw. It's not going to give you any benefit otherwise, so if you're not using the Beast's Embrace rune paired with the Beast Claw, it's just to be, like, the fashion idea behind it, I guess, because you do transform into a sort of beast while you have it equipped. Next up we have the Amygdalan arm. Amygdalan. Majorly strength scaling with good arcane scaling. It's difficult to turn into an arcane weapon due to the higher strength requirement, but it still has good arcane scaling. So as you can see, it has a 17 strength requirement. That makes it a little bit more difficult to turn into an arcane weapon, but you could always just run a strength arcane build. It's not too difficult. You might even want to use the Logarius' wheel on that, or something like maybe, I don't know, what is it called? The pizza cutter, the Whirligig saw. But the entire moveset is one-handed, which is interesting because this is supposed to be a sort of great club, but you cannot buff it. It has medium rally, which is to say 50 or 60, probably 50. Transformed fully charged attack, heavy attack, has additional follow-up swings that are performed automatically. No other inputs are entered. So normally if you don't charge the heavy attack, it does this normal follow-up swing attack, where it does a slash and then a slash. But if you fully charge it, first you will do a slam, and then if you don't do anything else, it'll do the slash and then the other slash. I don't know if these slashes will cause it to actually inflict a backstab, but the bonk is definitely going to be doing the backstab. Just something to think about. It's a very basic weapon otherwise. It's a very satisfying weapon because of how heavily you smash things with it, but it's very basic. The Beast Hunter's safe. Mainly skill scaling, but good arcane scaling. It has low requirements, making it easy to turn into an arcane weapon. The entire moveset is one-handed. You can buff it. It has low rally, I believe at 30, maybe 35. And this is one of the more interesting sort of beast hunter cleaver sort of things. Beast cleaver. It's a beast hunter safe. In its untransformed state, it actually is longer, and its transformed state is actually when the blade is tucked away. And it's much faster in its transformed state, but it has much farther reach in its untransformed state. It's a very different version of the Beast Cleaver, the Beast Spear. And it's more satisfying, I would say. Especially if you wanted to go like in and out against opponents, because the transform attacks will do that. When it's in its faster state, it'll pull you closer towards the opponent during the transform attack, and then when you're untransforming it, it'll push you away so you can get more distance. It's just a very fluid moveset. It's very fun. The Beast Cutter is also very fun. It's basically the strength version of the Threaded Cane. It has somewhat higher strength scaling, but lower scaling overall. The low requirements make it easy to turn into an arcane weapon, but it has low arcane scaling, so it's not great to do that with. Its entire moveset is one-handed. It can be buffed. It has low rally at 30. It has bonus serrated effect in both modes and deals purely blunt damage, which is pretty weird and rare. So because it's a blunt weapon and because it has serrated, you would think that's really weird. So because it's saying it's sharp, but it's a blunt weapon. So this is weird. It has a very long range to it, especially on the backstep heavy attack. You can actually hit the Wine Hakama, the hunter who's like banging their head on the wall in the DLC. You can hit them through the wall, through the door, using the backstep heavy attack of the Beast Cutter. It's very crazy how far this thing reaches. Very strong, very fun. It's pretty slow and it doesn't have hyper armor, but it's very fun. The Bloodletter, a majorly strength scaling with even higher Bloodtinge scaling and decent arcane scaling. Its strength and Bloodtinge requirements make it difficult to turn into an arcane weapon. So as you can see, it has 14 strength and 16 Bloodtinge. The 6th skill is very not important. I believe everything can reach that amount. Normal mode is one-handed. It's also a very small compared to its transformed mode, which is two-handed and much larger while dealing only blood damage. It cannot be buffed. It has medium rally, which is 45. Only the transformed mode is affected by the Bloodtinge scaling. So, transforming the weapon removes 20% of your health. It is recommended to use a transform attack to potentially get some rally healing off of the attack. So, instead of just stabbing yourself in the chest, you should stab yourself in the chest very aggressively so that you might actually hit someone with it. So, it's a good idea. The left heavy, the L2 button, while transformed, will cause frenzy buildup on yourself and players hit by it, with 179 buildup to yourself. So what that means is you can actually look at your frenzy buildup stat over here, your frenzy resistance. You can plan around using this weapon so you have at least enough to not instantly frenzy yourself when you're using this left heavy attack. So Bloodletter is a very fun weapon. We didn't really have very many strength Bloodtinge weapons. This one definitely is that, so there is the idea where the two-handed one is only blood, so it's probably only Bloodtinge. If you wanted it to be a strength weapon, it has to be one-handed, but it's definitely a fun option, so there is that. Then we have the boom hammer. Very similar to the Tonitrus, it only has a couple of moves in its attack chain. It's majorly strength scaling with good arcane scaling. It has innate fire damage, but apparently this is only applied while it's buffed under its own effect. Somewhat low requirements and innate fire damage make it a decent arcane weapon. The more fire you can get on it, probably the better. The entire moveset is one-handed. The transform mode only lasts for one attack and is identical to normal mode but with fire explosions. It cannot be buffed. It has medium rally, which is about 40, maybe 45. The weapon does not have fire damage unless it is transformed. So once you transform it, it doesn't do the fire damage it says it does. Unless you transform it, it doesn't do the fire damage it says it does, so that is just something to remember. It's not really benefiting from it until it's transformed, and it's probably still that way even if you do make it pure fire damage. I'm not completely sure about that, but typically that's how that works. The boomhammer is just a very basic weapon, but if you like the explosions like I do, it's very fun, most certainly. Next up we have the church pick. The church pick is mainly a skill scaling with good arcane scaling weapon. Its skill requirement makes it somewhat more difficult to turn into an arcane weapon, but it's still possible. Normal mode is one-handed, and transform mode is two-handed. It turns into a sort of saif, but it's really not. You were definitely using it as a thrust weapon still. It's just you're trying to slam the sharp end on them. It's a very weird-looking weapon, I would say. I would prefer it one-handed, just to say. It can be buffed. It has high rally. It inflicts higher damage to beasts and has righteous property, but only on the thrusting attacks. So if one of its attacks doesn't do thrust damage, it doesn't have the righteous or beast damaging property. Then we have Holy Moonlight Sword. Its name is so long it actually doesn't fit in the title. I had to squish it together. Majorly arcane scaling with high strength scaling and good skill scaling, which is to say it's a quality weapon. This is one of the highest scaling weapons in Bloodborne. It has a bit of everything except for Bloodtinge, of course. It's already an arcane weapon, but it's also a decent strength skill weapon, so you can use it in its untransformed state and still benefit. The normal mode is one-handed. Transformed is two-handed. Transformed heavy attack costs 1 Quicksilver bullet to use to their full ability. And the wiki was saying, once you run out of Quicksilver bullets and you start swinging the weapon, it no longer gets a sort of higher arcane modifier. It starts doing its typical split of like 70% arcane damage, 30% physical, I guess. It changes the way it scales, because normally the projectile gets all of the arcane scaling. So when it can no longer fire the projectile, I'm assuming it no longer splits the arcane with the physical damage. It cannot be buffed. It has high rally at like 50, or 60 even. I think it's 50 though. There really was only 2 things that had 60, which was the Kirkhammer and the Ludwig's Holy Sword. So the Holy Moonlight Sword probably, because it's comparable to those two, might have 60, but I don't know, I'd have to check. Because I only put if it was low, medium, or high. And I know that medium is 40, and high is 50 or higher, so. Both modes have the righteous damage modifier. And this is just the main arcane weapon. It has a bit higher stat requirements, but of course, it is also very pretty and very strong, so. It's very effective, it's a very good weapon. But the cost parasite has even higher arcane scaling, even higher arcane requirements. If you really wanted to be an arcane build, this is a major arcane weapon. It has the highest arcane requirement at 20 of a weapon anyway. The hunter tools are definitely better for that, but it is entirely arcane scaling. It is an arcane weapon, and it is difficult to use otherwise. You cannot really make it be a physical weapon. You can probably turn it into fire, you can probably turn it into lightning, but you cannot turn it into a physical weapon very easily. You would have to use the gems that add physical damage, and you can't really put a percentage on it, especially since it has no other scaling. It's just an arcane weapon. Its normal mode is one-handed, its transform mode is two-handed, and the moveset is normally identical to the bare-handed moveset, so it can be fun to use without the Milkweed Rune, as the damage is still significant despite being the bare-handed moveset. So if you were an arcane build and you didn't want to use the Milkweed Rune, you could use the cost parasite to trick people into thinking you're just trying to hit them with your hands, and then suddenly you do like 200 damage per hand slap, and they're like, whoa, what the heck, that's not supposed to happen. Cannot be buffed. It has low rally, which is like 30. Moveset changes drastically with the Milkweed Rune equipped. The normal mode is one-handed, the transform is two-handed, both have increased range. Transform mode cannot perform backstabs because it does not have a charged heavy attack, but since you're an arcane build, you might as well just use the Augur of Ebrietas, but we'll get to that later. Transformed L2, which is the left heavy, will cause an AoE explosion, and this is important because it costs 2 Quicksilver bullets to perform, and you can still get parried, so don't get parried. Cost Parasite's a very interesting weapon, very powerful, very fun. Next up is the Rakuyo. It's a very skill-scaling weapon with good arcane scaling. I believe it has pretty high skill requirement as well. Yep, it has 20 skill requirements, so if you're a skill build, you might want to use the Rakuyo just because of that. You're not going to be able to use it very easily on anything else. It has very high skill requirement, making it difficult to turn into an arcane weapon. Its normal mode is one-handed. You use it with both sides put together. It's kind of like a twin blade in that regard. Its transformed is two-handed, which pops the dagger off the back of the weapon and uses it in your other hand. It cannot perform backstabs in the transform mode because it does not have a charged heavy attack. You can buff it, and it has medium rally. There's nothing else much to say about it. It just has an interesting moveset and a lot of skill requirement. It's pretty strong. Next up is Simon's Bowblade, probably one of the more unique weapons of Bloodborne, if only because it's a bow with other things to it. And there never really has been something like that. The only thing comparable would be the shield crossbow from Dark Souls 2. It's majorly skill and Bloodtinge scaling with good arcane scaling. They're actually almost even with skill and Bloodtinge scaling. So the major scaling and skill and Bloodtinge make it difficult to turn into an arcane weapon. You definitely could, but it's very not recommended. I don't think it has nearly as much of a requirement. Yeah, at only like 15 skill here. Doesn't have nearly as much of a requirement of skill as the Rakuyo does, but it definitely compares. It's just not 20. So normally it's one-handed. It's sort of like a curved sword. And transformed, it's two-handed. And it turns into a bow. You can even hit people with the arrow in your other hand. It's interesting. It's most transformed attacks cost 1 quicksilver bullet to perform. I say most because you can actually use the left-handed heavy attack to hit people with the arrow, and you can use the jump attack to directly hit people with the bow itself, which is very silly. Also, when you run out of quicksilver bullets, it will force you to use one of those attacks. It will instead hit people with the bow, the arrow itself. It's interesting. It cannot be buffed. It has low rally, probably 30. I don't even think you can get rally off of its projectile attacks, but I did not test that. I wanted to, but I really don't think you can. The normal mode scales with skill, while transform scales with Bloodtinge. So this is important, because as usual, when something has Bloodtinge or Arcane stuff, it has a requirement in order to actually benefit from those, but either way, it has equal scaling, so if you are a Bloodtinge or skill build, you'll still benefit from both. Normal mode, charged attacks hit twice, and transformed charge attack can hit from a significant distance. However, you're probably not going to be able to run up and backstab someone if you hit them from a significant distance, so if you do actually backstab someone with the charge attack, it's not going to be your riposte that's going to go through, which is interesting. But transform jumping attacks will attack with the bow itself and does not cost a bullet to use. So it's fun. It's a fun weapon. It's very unique. It's comparable to the Reiterpallasch, but the Reiterpallasch can be buffed. So this is much more of a skill Bloodtinge weapon. Moving on, we have the Whirligig Saw, the last weapon. It majorly scales with strength, and it has good arcane scaling. I believe it also has a pretty high strength requirement of like 18. Yep, 18. And it also has 12 skill, so it has high strength scaling and requirement, makes it difficult to turn into arcane weapon. Its normal mode is one-handed. It sort of works a lot like the Kirkhammer and the Ludwig's Holy Blade, where you have the backpack sort of thing going on, and you transform it by shoving your weapon into the backpack and using it as a weapon. Its transformed mode is two-handed, as it should be. It can be buffed, which is crazy. It has high rally, which is also crazy because you can hit multiple times with this thing. So that means it has like 50, 60. Its transformed mode has the serrated damage modifier, which of course it does because it's a saw. So it's a very fun PvE weapon. I don't think it's very good in PvP, but you can still fight people with it. It still does a relatively high amount of damage. It's very fun. It's very fun. And next up we have Firearms. I thought about putting these in yellow and the Hunter Tools in blue, but I did not do that, so Firearms, we have Ludwig's Rifle and the Hunter's Blunderbuss, which can only parry closer targets, with Ludwig's Rifle having closer pellet spread or damage range, which is to say the Ludwig's Rifle actually has a longer distance that the pellets will travel and still do a relatively high amount of damage compared to the Hunter's Blunderbuss. However, you cannot parry people unless they're in front of you, so do not try, it will not work. The Flame Sprayer and Rosmarinus are weird firearms that can do elemental damage. They have arcane scaling. They can use one bullet for 2 to 3 ticks of damage per bullet consumed, and they scale with arcane. They can be useful to remove an opponent's chance to obtain healing through the rally mechanic. So, because of how wide the spread of fire or the angel's tears are, as the Rosmarinus says that it is spreading, you can prevent the opponent from getting the health from whatever weapon you hit them with using rally. It can be really effective at preventing your opponent from using the rally mechanic because it will count as a hit and because it counts as a hit, it overwrites their current ability to get rally health back. So if you hit them real hard and then you use a Flame Sprayer or Rosmarinus, it could be a very good idea for permanent damage to your opponents. So Repeating Pistol is the strongest gun, but it requires 2 bullets per shot. So every time you shoot with the Repeating Pistol, it fires using 2 bullets, but it is definitely the most powerful pistol. The cannon has high strength requirements, but it deals tremendous damage, especially against staggered opponents. So you can use it with a combination of the Reiterpallasch to parry first and then shoot them with the cannon. But the problem is the cannon fires in a straight line, so it only flies for a set amount of distance. So if you just shoot it straight ahead at someone, it's not going to keep going. The Evelyn is considerably stronger at higher Bloodtinge levels, I believe at 22 or higher. It has similar speed to other pistols despite the different animation. They actually, on the wiki, this proved it to me. It was a side-by-side animation comparison of the Hunter's pistol and the Evelyn. They are exactly the same speed, down to the frame. They are exactly the same, so it is not faster. It is not faster. So the Evelyn is just stronger at higher levels. But it also looks cooler because it has a different firing animation. So the Church Cannon, compared to the cannon, it costs fewer bullets, it can travel a much farther distance, but instead of in a straight line, it fires in an arc. That means it goes up and down, like that. So if you just fire it straight, it'll be all and fall straight down. You want to fire it upwards so it can get its full potential going. You can use this as a sort of artillery weapon and fire it from a significant distance, maybe up on a ledge or something, down at people. It'll work much better, but the main thing is it requires fewer bullets. It also does less damage, but because of its utility as an artillery weapon, it can be very fun to use. The piercing rifle has higher difficulty in landing parries. It actually says this in its description. It is not as good at landing parries. It basically works like a medium shield does. It's the only gun that does this, but instead of that, it has piercing and is able to hit multiple targets with one shot. So if you were shooting at multiple enemies, the piercing rifle is capable of hitting all of them, instead of just the one in front. So that is an interesting idea. It's not amazing, but the fact remains that it can do that, and that's pretty cool. The Gatling rifle is unusual. Honestly, I don't believe the Gatling rifle is very useful at all. It does not benefit from Bone Marrow Ash, apparently, so putting Bone Marrow Ash on it is just a waste of Bone Marrow Ash. And generally, it's just for the thrill of spraying bullets at something. But not every bullet fired does damage. So every now and then, the bullets will do damage. It's like every 3 or 4 bullets, it will actually do like a tick of damage. I think it does cause hit stuns, so if you have more than one person firing this thing, it still is very dangerous, very hard to get away from, but that's really it. It's like you're using a flame spray, or fire surge from Dark Souls 1 against somebody. It does very low damage. It's not very good at it. It has some pretty high requirements. Oh, that's right, I have to go to the guns. It has very high requirements to use. Not even Bloodtinge scaling. Not even a Bloodtinge requirement. It has Bloodtinge scaling, and of course it does blood damage, so all these requirements just don't do anything. It's just for fun. It's just, you want to spray a whole bunch of bullets in a general enemy's direction. That's what the Gatling rifle is for. Hunter tools. A Call Beyond is definitely the strongest, with the goal being to land as many of the projectiles on a target as possible, and apparently this is much easier at a distance. You want to use it as artillery fire. Personally, I like to use it the way that Mikolash uses it, where you kind of just activate it in someone's face, they hit you, but it's still gonna keep going, and then they're just like, well, what do I do now? And they get blasted with a whole ton of projectiles. Especially since the ground ones aren't gonna hit anything anyway, so if someone's right in front of you, maybe the ground ones will actually hit them. The Accursed Brew has higher requirements, but lower bullet costs, and is effective due to its forward-thrown path. It has a higher requirement of 30 Arcane. A Call Beyond, I believe, has 40, just to say. And It's effective due to its forward thrown path that ends in a small explosion. So I definitely do not recommend the Black Sai. Instead, I recommend the Accursed Brew. It's very useful to get, but I believe in order to get it, you actually have to defeat the Orphan of Kos, which is not easy, that's for sure. The Augur of Ebrietas has the ability to parry or backstab opponents, and otherwise knocks them down, but you can leave your opponent... But it can leave you open for attacks on whiff. So if you don't hit anyone with the Augur of Ebrietas, then it's going to have a very long cooldown because the tentacles have to go back into the portal you just caused. It's very slow. The main thing to do with it is to run up behind someone and try to backstab somebody. It also has very low range, despite the tentacles going pretty far. It's a pretty fun tool, especially because it gives the ability to backstab a lot easier than anything else, because you don't have to charge it. They added this in a buff during one of the updates, so it wasn't a thing you could always do, that's for sure. The Beast Roar is particularly useful to throw enemies off of cliffs with large AoE shockwave that does no damage. The Beast Roar, I think it has a bit of a requirement to it, maybe 16, 18 arcane, but it's very useful just so that you can have a shockwave and just throw people off a cliff. It's very fun to do that, always fun. It's a lot faster than Force is, too, so a lot faster and wider, like, range to it. I guess because it's... Well, no, I was gonna say because it costs a finite source, but that's the same thing. So. It's just instead of FP, which you can technically get back and have more of, it costs bullets, which you can technically get back and have more of, so don't worry about it. The Black Sky Eye is very cheap with decent damage and can sometimes be useful instead of using a firearm, but personally I find it to be somewhat slow, especially when the comparison is a gun. That makes sense. That it's a bit slower than a gun. So. I don't really recommend the Black Sky Eye. It's not amazing, but if you're using it for PvE, it's still a good idea because it relies on Arcane. It costs 1 bullet. If you want to hit something with it, it's pretty good. The Empty Phantasm Shell allows you to buff a weapon with 80 Arcane damage, not get any stronger than 80. It's useful on faster weapons because, you know, it's 80 no matter what. So if you put this on the Reiterpallasch, then suddenly all of its bullets do 80 more damage. If you were allowed to buff the rifle spear with it, suddenly all 15 of its shotgun pellets will have 80 more damage. So 80 times 15, and then just have everyone be like, well, I guess I'm dead now. So that's why you definitely cannot buff the rifle spear. Executioner's gauntlets, Executioner's gloves. Fire 3 skulls with high tracking. They're very basic. They don't go all that far. I forever thought that they do blood damage, but apparently they do not. They just cause a knockdown effect on dog enemies, so they do not do blood damage. They are arcane. The wiki seems to say this, but it doesn't say that it's not blood damage. It just says it is arcane. And it doesn't say arcane damage, so I'm still not completely convinced, but it seems as though they do arcane damage, and I'm gonna just have to believe that, even though when testing, it does knock over dogs, and dogs always get knocked over by blood damage, so unless it specifically always causes a knockdown like that on smaller enemies, then I don't know. I don't know exactly how to test it, so. The Choir Bell can heal yourself and allies, which is why it is expensive. Once you get to higher levels of like 50 plus, the Choir Bell can heal you for about as much as your blood vials will. So, Choir Bell's very good because you can just have more healing with it. So, it's not recommended to specifically invest in Arcane for the Choir Bell, but the fact remains it can heal yourself and allies, and that's very annoying, especially because there's an NPC that has infinite bullets and also can use the Choir Bell. But the Choir Bell does also cure your poison buildup and your rapid poison buildup. It does not cure frenzy buildup though. The Madara's Whistle over here in blue uses Bloodtinge to deal arcane damage. So it has a Bloodtinge requirement, which is why it's in blue. And it summons a snake to attack below you that will hit yourself and nearby enemies. Apparently if you are walking while you do this, you will walk far enough that you're out of the way before the snake actually hits you, so you don't really need to worry too much about getting away from it, but you could just stand there and then suddenly roll away, and you could bait people into getting hit by it. It's very hard to avoid because it actually lasts longer than your iframes, so you need to make sure to get away from it. At least I'm pretty sure it lasts longer than your iframes, because what it says on the wiki is specifically the hitbox of the attack is active all the way up to the point where the snake is actually going back and disappearing. So, it has a very active hitbox. The Messenger's Gift can change your appearance into a messenger note, allowing you to hide from players, but also possibly draw them close, because remember, you are a message. You could be giving some information, or you could have something funny to say. People might be drawn to that and like go up and be like, ooh, a message, and then you could probably smack them in the face. It could be pretty cool. The Old Hunter's Bone, apparently it does not increase your iframes, it increases the speed of your dodges. So the only thing it does is make it a bit easier for you to dodge again, or perform an attack after dodging. So, personally, I don't find this very useful, but because it leaves such a disorienting cloud, it can be very useful because it also allows you to follow up with an attack very quickly. It's definitely beneficial. It also makes it a lot easier to dodge things like bullets, you know? And then we also have the tiny Tonitrus, which inflicts... It's the only of the hunter tools that inflicts lightning damage in a tall column straight ahead that can sometimes climb up objects. It's not going to go very far, it's not going to do any significant turns or anything, but it does a fair amount of lightning damage. It also costs 6 bullets, which is quite a lot. About as much as the Choir Bell does, I believe. I think the Choir Bell is 7, but the Tiny Tonitrus is pretty expensive, but also pretty strong. It's also the only one that does lightning damage, like I said. It's hard to get it to work, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty good. And then we also have shields and torches. The first time I get to use all the colors at once, the wooden shield is better at blocking physical and blood damage, which makes it the better shield. And the lock shield is better at blocking elemental damage, which is not a good idea because hunter tools usually hit very hard and multiple times and can be followed up behind. Like, you can go in and hit them while they're being hit, so the lock shield will get guard broken, you'll get hit in the face with a really strong attack, and then you'll die. So I don't recommend using the lock shield, I recommend using the wooden shield because it can actually block bullets, and blocking bullets is typically a good idea because of how strong they are, how fast they are, so I would recommend using the wooden shield if you wanted to use a shield at all, because it is really the best one. The Fist of Gratia is actually another hunter tool, but, well, it was in the hunter tool category. It was in the torches category, or the shields category, one of these, and so I had to include it here. It's an offhand weapon. You can use it to break enemies' poise and armored attacks, but it also has backstep, running, and rolling attacks, so you can actually add to your moveset by adding a left-handed Fist of Gratia, which is pretty cool, but it doesn't do a whole lot of damage. It's mainly used to break armored attacks and such, but the fact remains it adds to your moveset and can be pretty interesting, and it's actually a sort of punching thing, so if you wanted to actually punch stuff, maybe you have a stake driver in the other hand, this would be a pretty cool idea, but again, it's not really going to do all that much damage. The basic torch is completely inferior to the Hunter's Torch. The Hunter's Torch is just straight up better. They have the same requirements. It's just stronger no matter what. The Hunter's Torch is actually a decent fire elemental weapon on an arcane build, but it's still not amazing. It's still just like sort of okay. It's still not amazing. Nothing awesome. It's just, you have a torch, you can actually hit people with a torch, it does fire damage, so that's it for Bloodborne. Not nearly as long as the others, I would think, but we're gonna take a look at that right after this, so generally, you get your health up. Every point of health also increases how much you heal, because healing is percentage based. So health is generally the most important part. But then you remember that skill also increases your critical damage, so you get one Bloodtinge parry with your gun, and then you just kill people. Or you can get an Arcane Augur of Ebrietas backstab, and then just one-shot kill people, and that's pretty much how Bloodborne is. People will constantly be shooting you in the face. Their gun might not do a whole lot of damage. Hopefully it doesn't do a whole lot of damage, because, you know, it's kind of difficult to invest both in Bloodtinge and skill. I know that my level 98 has 35 of both. One of them I think is at 36, but this is the way to go in Bloodborne. You want to run a skill Bloodtinge build because of these reasons. You can also run a health build. You could just purely put health and then just wield something and then have it like regenerate, but the main thing to do is to have skill and Bloodtinge. It's very hard to make a strength build work, but the, what is it? The blood one? The Bloodhammer? Bloodletter? Bloodletter kind of tries to make up for that because it also has Frenzy, and Frenzy is really strong, so if you can land that left heavy attack, that'd be really good. I don't think you can parry it either, but I'm not completely sure about that, so... Yeah, you can parry heals in this game. I forgot to mention that. You can parry someone trying to heal, so... You're probably going to get parried at some point or other. You need to be ready for that. You can't really do that much about it. You just need to understand you're going to get parried. Your defenses don't usually matter, because it's not like there's any sort of poise, there's not any weight to anything, so really just put on whatever you want. And just have fun, you know? If you can actually get the PvP to work at all, just have fun. So, that's going to be it. That's going to be it.